Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me out tonight. My name is Phill Sikes. I'm from Overland Park, and I'm a member of the Kansas City Woodturners. So Mike invited me a couple months ago after I did this demo for them. And we're going to look at tonight is turning enclosed forms using gouges, and which is a little bit different. Most people think about like an enclosed form and think of like a hollow form. And usually when you're working with a hollow form, you're using some kind of a scraper or some kind of hollowing tool. But tonight, we're going to look at something a little bit different, because at the beginning of the year, I started trying to learn how to do a hollow form. I've been turning for about 6 years. Now, how many of you have been turning for longer than 6 years? All right, a few of you, pretty good. So hopefully I'll learn something from you guys tonight, but hopefully I can share something with you guys here tonight too. But I've never really done a hollow form, so I decided I need to learn how to do a hollow form. And I had a set of hollowing tools, and I started working on the first couple, and I thought, man, it takes a long time to hollow these out. And I just kept reaching for a gouge to like get the hollowing started, and then I decided that I would just keep hollowing it with the gouge and see how far I could get with it. And then I just put the hollowing tools down all together, and I just kept going with the gouges and kind of developed what we're working on here tonight. And then I also had the opportunity to work with a couple different people on some of the work that they've done, and they taught me a few things, so we're going to talk about that. Mel, do you want to put the slides there? So when I think about an enclosed form, I think about really just a form whose rim diameter is smaller than the greater diameter of the piece. So that can mean a lot of things. That can mean a hollow form, that could mean a calabash bowl, that could mean a lot of things. And right here I've got an image from Richard Raffin on there that just has a couple of different shapes, all sorts of shapes actually, that kind of encompass kind of what we're talking about. And if you go to the second slide, I don't know what they told you that I was going to talk about tonight, but when I went to the Kansas City Woodturners, they said, I was going to do a demo on a calabash bowl. And I thought, it's not a calabash bowl, because a calabash is a really specific bowl, a specific kind of bowl in shape and diameter, or not diameter, but in shape and kind of proportion. So we're not going to look at that tonight, but the techniques you use to make a calabash bowl are very similar to what we're going to do here tonight, just a little bit different. Who here has made a calabash bowl in the past, or general calabash shape? If you haven't, and you want to learn how to do a calabash the right way, Emiliano is probably the premier guy on making calabash bowls right now. He'll give you the entire history. He does a great demo. You know, just plan for like 4 or 5 hours of this dude talking about wood, because he loves talking about calabash bowls, and it's great. Go to the next slide there. And the next slide here is some different guys and some different shapes here that I got more interested in and kind of led me down the path that I'm on right now. Specifically Matt Monaco down in the lower right-hand corner over there. I took a class with him earlier in the year, and I followed his work for a little while. A lot of these shapes are similar to his, and I use some similar techniques that I learned from him. And he's a great guy teaching this type of work too. So if it's something that you're interested in, I'd encourage you to look him up and take a class with him in the future too. He does more like a pottery style, and it's kind of very, I'd say very classy, very kind of specific to what he's doing. But then you've got, you know, Richard Raffin. Who else is up here? Oh, Liam Flynn is one of my favorite guys to look at right now. I'm really inspired by his work, and he did these really cool vessels and forms. And I don't know how he did them. I'm still trying to figure that one out. But some of the shapes that he did, I'm kind of after with what I'm working on here tonight. And then go to the last slide here. So this just talks about the gouges that I'm going to use tonight. I'm primarily going to use 2 gouges. And one of them is pretty standard, and then the other one is just a little bit different. The first one, and let me see if I can get it on the right camera. There we go. Ta-da! This is a pretty standard, there we go, swept-back grind tool. It's got about a 40-degree angle on it, and then it's got this really relieved area on it right here to get it out of the way. So I'm really only cutting with this very kind of thin bevel on the tool, and that's what helps get inside and get around these forms on these bowls. And then if you look at this tool right here, there we go. This is a, have you guys ever heard of a bottom bowl gouge? All right, who makes bowls? Who generally is a bowl maker, vessel maker? Who does just spindles? One person. All right, great. So who hasn't heard about a bottom bowl gouge? One person, a couple people. Really, a bottom bowl gouge is a bowl gouge, right? But it has a very different grind than what most people use today. So a lot of people use these swept back or Ellsworth style grinds right here. And this grind is very much in the vein of like a traditional grind that you'd find on a spindle gouge, except when you put it on the flute of a bowl gouge, it does something very different. And this is really what we're going to talk about tonight when we get to the inside of these bowls, because this is how you get around these inside curves safely without a whole lot of chatter and without scaring you when it catches. So we're going to look at that. And what this has here too is a very, let's see if I can get it in the right light. Or if you look up here, no.
Show up to this camera right here.
This one right here?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Down a little.
Down a little. Whoop, there we go. It has a very heavy relief on it right there. And after I'm done here, you can come and take a look at it. But it creates just this very thin micro bevel, is what I like to call it. And that's all that's doing the cutting. That's all that's touching the wood. And we'll see the advantage of that and why that's helpful here in a few minutes. So a couple of these shapes here that I have. This is kind of a shape that I really like. And I made this all with gouges. And then very little sanding too. I sanded with 400, 320, 400, and then I just burnished the outside and put a little bit of oil on it. So if you come up and feel these, you're going to feel some texture to them, which I really like how this oak and other pieces of wood kind of shrink up after you let them dry for a bit. So this was wet when I turned it. And this one doesn't have a ton of texture on it. This one has a bit more to it right there. And when the wood fibers just kind of shrink up, they there we go. They have this nice, very tactile feel to them, and a lot of people love just to pick these up and hold them, and that's kind of the goal that I had. And if you feel on the inside too, you're going to feel all the ridges from the wood as it shrinks up, and also maybe some of my cuts too, because I didn't go in with a scraper and clean these up at all. All I did was cut them with a gouge and then kind of finished them off. So a lot of these are more practice for me to kind of figure out how I want to do the technique. And then I've made larger ones and other ones that I put up for sale and things like that that are a little bit more refined. But these are kind of fun. You kind of feel like, where do I end with one tool and then start with the other? And we'll kind of see where that happens. Now, one thing you don't want to do is go through the bottom, which is what I did on this guy right here. There we go. There's a little hole there in the bottom. And so I cut it in half, but it's a really good example of what the cross-section of this is going to look like, where we have kind of very thin rim section up here. It gets thicker where it curves. And then it gets thinner down here towards the bottom. Now, if you get too thin, you see what happens. Yeah, we don't want to do that. A lot of these have a round bottom because I like a round bottom, but it also helps avoid this as well. But this thicker area right here on the kind of the middle section doesn't cause too many issues with the drying because the rest of the wood around it is thinner and it allows it to kind of compress where it needs to without it pulling apart or cracking. And it also helps get around that corner that you don't have to get quite as thin right there with that wall as well. So,
you finished turning these green?
Yeah. So I finished turning them green, and I'll sand them green on the lathe as I'm doing it, because the moment I take it off the lathe, it's going to start to distort. It's going to probably distort even as I'm doing it. By the time I'm done, the rim of this piece, because this is a wet piece of walnut right here, is already going to start to move. So I have no chance to go back and redo it at all. So sanding it on the lathe gets a nice smooth surface right now, and then in a couple of days, as it starts to dry, it takes about 1 to 2 weeks for them to really dry out. You're going to have that texture from the wood as it's dried take the place of that smooth surface. And you can burnish these then and still get a nice smooth surface out of it, but you feel the texture of the wood, and that's what makes it interesting between oak, walnut, or another type of wood, is that each of these is going to feel different in your hand. And that's what I like about the oak or an ash or something like that, is you can really feel the texture, versus something with a closer grain like a maple. You don't feel a ton of texture unless there's a lot of figure on the wood, and then you're going to feel more of that texture from that figure too. Yeah. So it's kind of a different way of finishing it off. Since I finish it on the lathe right away, I take the bottom off right away, and then I put it in a bag and let it dry for a bit. And depends on the wood. I put a couple in the microwave and have had good experience drying those very quickly in a microwave. And then I've had some very bad experiences with that. The oak did not like the microwave, so I don't encourage you to put oak in the microwave. But some other woods, maples worked well, and a few others have worked well in the microwave too. Usually the closer grained woods, some of the softer woods that aren't quite as volatile as oak. And that's kind of a fun experiment. We're not going to talk about that tonight. But there's some fun things you can do to get wood to dry and see what it does, see how it moves. Yeah, but any questions on these? No? All right, let's get turning because I do want to get you guys out before nap time. So if you do have any questions that I can mention during, please feel free. And I'll go ahead and pass these around if you want to just kind of feel them a little bit or see what that cross section looks like and check it out. So I'm going to start out between centers, and you can start it out any way you'd like to. I happen to like doing it between centers, so if I want to adjust the piece, I have the option to do that before I decide on my orientation. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put my tenon on the bottom right here. This is the middle or the center of the tree. A lot of people will put the tenon on the outside of the tree. The reason why I put it on the inside is I like the look when you look in the bottom of a bowl to see rings inside the bowl as opposed to that kind of cross section that you might see. So that's a difference too. If you look inside some of these, you're going to see more of a circular or a rounded shape to the grain pattern in there instead of more of the crisscross grain that kind of shoots out for you at the bottom right there too. It's really a matter of preference visually for me, but you can do it any way you want to. I mentioned this is walnut, and this is from a branch that came out of one of my trees in my yard, and that's why it's pretty much all sapwood and not a whole lot of heartwood in here. So we got a little bit, but we'll see how we do. And it is a little bit wet, so I apologize to anybody in the front row. Hopefully this shield keeps you guys dry. And there we go. So we're just going to start by shaping it just like you would any other bowl or vessel. And I'm going to start to get a general shape going. And then I'm going to finish the shape once I turn it around in the chuck. Once it balances out, I'll get the speed up closer to about 12 or 1300. Right now we're going to go around 1000 RPM because it's a small piece, and just get the wood off. Okay. This lathe is a little taller than mine at home. I got kind of a short one, so it makes me feel a little short. Here we go. You're going to see me do a couple things here tonight that you generally don't do, or people say don't do, but you can totally do it because, well, you can do whatever you want to. But usually, when you're doing a bowl, they'd say, "Oh, come around here this way," and don't go down. But we're going to cut down. If you do with a sharp tool, you can cut right through it. It's not going to be that big of an issue. You're just going to make sure you go with a nice slow cut if you're doing a finishing cut off. So I just want to get this area off. Then we'll come around here. All right. Since it is wet, I just want to check the tailstock every once in a while because I don't want it coming off the lathe. Now, who here likes to do hollow forms? Anyone? Mel? Anybody else? So this is like hollow form for people who doesn't like to do a hollow form, because you don't need to use any hollowing tools. So that's kind of nice. Just going to check the base for my that's good enough. Gonna get my tenon going here. And it's a pretty small piece, so I don't need a very big tenon on it, but I want to make sure it's a good tenon. I'm going to use dovetail jaws, so I want to make sure I got a nice dovetail and a nice flat surface right here, or slightly undercut so that it sits well on top of these jaws. And one thing with these jaws, these are the Shark Jaws by Vicmark, and they've got a flat top. And what I like to do is make sure that the surface that's going to sit on it is slightly smaller than the diameter of the jaw, so that it sits flush with the top of the jaw. If it's wider than the jaw right here, when I go and close it down, this step right here isn't actually going to sit flush on the jaw. There's going to be a gap. That's going to cause it to wobble. That's going to cause a lot of vibration, even on small pieces like this. You can ask me how I know that, and that's because I did a bad tenon one time, and it wobbled. I'm just using a small spindle gouge to get that shape the way that I want it to right there, and that's going to sit nice on the jaw face. So let's go ahead and put it on the jaw, or put it on the chuck. I like to make sure I try to line up the grain orientation with the jaws, because it is green, it is going to compress, and this just helps make that compression even around the jaw surface right there. And since it is green, we're going to tighten it up a little bit more than I would if it was dry. And the reason why I didn't really finish the outside is because when I do this, I'm going to pinch and squeeze and it's going to move. So now when I check this, we're probably going to find that it's not running true. Yeah. So there's no point to me finishing it between centers, because when I put it in the jaws right there, I'm going to have to re-true it up anyway, especially if I want to go and do some nice thin walls. If I do some thin walls with it, you want to make sure you've trued it up in your chuck. Otherwise, you can go through the side. Has anyone ever had that happen to them? No? Because I've had it happen to me recently. So. Alright, hopefully that's going to be far enough out of the way. Alright, so now that I've got this way, we're going to go ahead and true up the surface there. We're going to remove a little more material here and kind of get our final shape that we want. Sorry for making a little mess right here. We're going to have to clean that off later. Now this is where I want to decide what my shape is going to look like. And a good rule of thumb, if you've never made one of these before, is to either start with your maximum diameter either at center or a little bit above center. If you put it below center, it gets a little tricky. So putting it above center and keeping a larger opening on top is going to give you a little more options to kind of work into it. And then as you get a little bit more aggressive with it, you can decide to have smaller opening, further out, smaller turning radius, and you sit there and you get stuck and figure out, all right, what do I need to do to get around this corner? These ones aren't too bad, but I have a couple that took me a really long time to get around that corner. Probably wasting time. I probably just should have pulled out a scraper, but that wasn't the point of the exercise. You want to move your tool rest around so you've got good support, so you can get a good push cut coming through. And I like this offset tool rest for when I do the hollowing out. You'll see where that comes in handy. But it's great for these small pieces that I can get it in by the chuck here where I want it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a little bit of space down here at the bottom so I can kind of figure out where the bottom is going to be and where it's going to go through. Because I don't want to have this nice shape go directly into the chuck here and then stop. If I want to have a nice bottom on it, or if I want to do a curved bottom, I want to make sure I can visualize where that curve is going to go across the bottom here. It is kind of an awkward position doing this with this gouge here too. So you can choose some other tools to do this as well. If you have a spindle gouge, that'll work really well. Or I might grab another tool here to do this outside bit here too in a minute. How many people in here are left-handed? Can you switch hands when you're turning?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. It's really handy for this spot right here if you can switch hands, because then it's a lot more comfortable. And putting this little gap here at the bottom just gives me some room for me to adjust the bottom where I want it to be in the shape and not go into the chuck and make sure that I don't go through the bottom like I did over there. So I try to do a nice clean push cut wherever I can to get as clean a surface as I can. Going across this section right here, if you can get a good clean push cut, then you're golden. If you can't, or if you get ridges you want to get rid of, that's where a nice little shear scrape is going to help clean that area up without tearing out too much grain. Especially because it's green right now, we're going to see there's going to be some tear out on the grain right there. And it'll probably, if I were to sand it tonight, I'd sand it out pretty easily because it's all wet. But if it's drier, or if you don't want to be doing that, you can come in and do a shear scrape to get rid of any ridges that you've got there. And with wet wood, I like to come out and not into the wood, because I find when you go into the wood, you just take off too much material. You end up cutting it a lot more than you'd like to. But if you're coming away from it, you're not putting as much pressure on the wood, and you're not going to pull off as much material. You guys know who Lyle Jamieson is? Have you ever watched him on YouTube? He talks about dancing at the lathe. And I thought it was the goofiest thing when I was like watching his videos, he's talking about that. But then I find myself doing that exact thing at the lathe. So if you're not dancing at the lathe, well, watch Lyle's video and maybe you'll start. All right. So I'm pretty happy with that. I want to take off this little piece of wood right here. This is part of the bark. I don't want to go too far undercut, so we're going to pull a little bit of that out. Okay. You know how I said don't put your largest diameter too low? It's getting a little low, but it'll be all right. All right, I don't want to get too finicky with the outside because I can get finicky and I don't want to do that to you guys tonight because we want to get you guys out of here before 9 o'clock. What's that?
That will make a hole.
Yeah. Yeah, now we're going to make a hole through the bottom. No. Let's go ahead and take a look at this bottom gouge here that I'm talking about, the micro bevel gouge, and we'll talk about why it works and why if you don't use one, you might want to try it even on just a regular bowl that you might have. So, where is it? Here it is. So far, we've used one gouge, just this guy right here. And this could be an Ellsworth grind, it could be a Irish grind, it could be whatever you want to do all the outside. There's really no reason why you can't just use your favorite gouge. To do the inside though, that's where we need a steeper bevel on our swept back grind. And that's where we're going to need our micro bevel gouge. Now, what we want to do is we still want to have our bevel contacting the wood while we're making all these cuts. So if you're familiar with a bottom bowl gouge, you're using the back side of the bevel to actually do the cutting as opposed to the front side. So let's see if I can get it on the... I can't. If you look at the camera right here on this side. There we go. Okay.
Here, try this camera.
This one? Which one is that on? There it is. There we go. Okay. The right side of the flute right here is usually what you use to cut the inside of a bowl, but we're going to use the other side right here, the left side, with this tool. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow it to be less aggressive. So if I were to do it with this front side of the flute right here, it's just going to go into the wood. I want to take out a big chunk. If I use the back side, what that's going to mean is that I'm going to put my flute up against I'm going to put my bevel up against the wood, and I'm going to have my handle further back. So when I'm cutting, I'm actually cutting on kind of the middle to the back of the flute there, not the middle front. All right. So if I'm using this tool to go in, I'm going to be cutting with the middle kind of front. All right. With this tool here, we're going to cut with the middle back. Because this tool is great for going in to the wood here across the grain. It's great for going in, right? But what it has problem with is going more across the grain. And that's what this is going to be for, is to be able to go across the grain smoothly and get a nice clean cut like you would on the bottom of a bowl. The other thing that using the middle back side of the flute here is going to do is create a smaller cut for you. It's going to take a smaller shaving, it's going to be easier to handle, and it's not going to be prone to digging in and going a direction you don't want it to go. It takes a little practice to get used to. It's kind of counterintuitive when you think about it. Once you actually try and get the feel for it, what you want to do is get this handle closer to you over here, not way over here, and use that back side, and make sure you've got your flute tilted, and you don't want to have it straight up because that can cause a catch. But when you've got it tilted at 30 to 45 degree, essentially what it's doing is creating a shearing cut right there, or a shearing angle with your blade, kind of like a guillotine. You guys know what a guillotine is? It's got that blade there that's on an angle. Do you know why it's on an angle? It cuts through the neck a lot easier, right? It cuts through a lot smoother because it's not crashing down on it like that. It's slicing through it. And so that's what this is going to do, is going to slice through the wood as opposed to just trying to barrel right through it, all right? So first I want to get bevel contact, and I'm going to start bringing my handle around until I start to cut. And I've got a nice smooth cut right there, and it's taking a nice small shaving to it, so it's not too aggressive on the cut. Now if I turn my tool in more, see how it takes that more aggressive cut? If I'm just removing material, you can do that. But it can get away from you. It's going to create a lot more ripple because the bevel is contacting in a different way. And we want to eliminate that. And finding where that bevel is and then starting your cut is really the trick to using this tool, or bottom bowl gouge in general, to get across the bottom of a bowl smoothly without creating a whole bunch of chatter or a whole bunch of ripples. How many of you have ever made a bowl and had a nice ripply bottom to it? Right? All right? A lot of you guys. You guys know why? Generally it's because your bevel is not contacting the wood. And you're essentially sticking a sharp blade in, and then it's creating ripples because it's bouncing in and out, bouncing in and out, right? If you can get the bevel to ride smoothly, or float the bevel as some people like to say, you're not going to get those ripples, or they're going to be a lot smaller and a lot more evenly spaced. And when you shorten the flute here, or the bevel, so you've got a nice micro bevel, that gets even smaller. And that's the goal here, is to get a nice smooth bottom with a gouge without having to scrape it and without working too hard. I don't have to work too hard to do that cut. I need to take it slow. I got to have a little finesse with it, but I don't need to work too hard with it. Now, let's just get rid of this material here, and then we'll get to the fun part, trying to go around the side. Any questions so far? You guys have all been quiet. It's not bedtime yet, right? Yeah? Okay. So I want to remove some material here. I want to get my rim set up, and then I'm going to start going around this curve right here and getting this nice undercut going. All right? So to get rid of the middle, we can just do that whatever way you're comfortable with. So this material is great for removing a lot of wood very quickly, which is what I really like about it. I want to make sure I don't tear out my rim too much here. So I'm going to try to just take a nice little cut with it. There we go. And now I'm going to start establishing the thickness of my piece at the very top right here with this tool. That's how you get a catch. So let's clean that rim up one more time. Now, does anybody know why my tool just kind of skated back that way?
Too closed?
Too closed?
Too closed?
Too open, more likely, yeah. So if your tool is, you want to start with it pretty closed right here, because if it's too open, it's going to skate back this way. If it's too closed, it's going to skate over this way. So wait, what did you say, open or closed?
I said closed.
Okay, so it's too open, so it's skated back towards me. If it's closed, it's going to skate the other way. I think. I'd have to double check. But essentially, I want to really post up with my tool right here, make sure that I've got it a good starting groove right there, and then go into my cut so that it doesn't skate back one way or the other on me right there. And there's a few ways you could do that. One is you could use even another tool to make just a little dent or a little dimple right there, so you've got a place to put your bevel right there. Or you just you try to really practice posting that finger right there so it doesn't skate back on you, and you get that initial cut in there as best you can. Let's go. And then as soon as I get that cut started, I can open it up and move through it, but it's that initial contact with the edge right there that you want to get that started with a nice posted finger. Now the great thing about this tool rest is with a larger piece, I can just stick this tool rest right inside it and get a nice angle on it. I probably won't be able to do that with this one, and that's all right. But I want to make sure my tool rest is now coming over here because I'm really working over this way. All right. Now, if you don't want to reach all the way over your lathe right here, and you have a lathe with a sliding headstock, slide it all the way down on your bed, and you're going to be able to work on the end of your lathe, which is how I usually work on my lathe at home. The other thing you can do, which I've never tried before and I'm not going to encourage you to do it, is to actually put your lathe in reverse. If you have a chuck that is locking, you can put your lathe in reverse and you can work from this direction, but you have to be dexterous enough to be able to do that. I'm not going to encourage you to do that. I don't know how to do that. I'm just going to say it's possible. So maybe someone who's left-handed might be a little bit better at that. I don't know. The other thing I'm doing when I start to get this cut going on the inside here, once I get it going, I'm really looking on this side because this is an easier side for me to see where the cut is as I'm moving around. And so you don't always need to look at where the tip of the tool is. You might get a better view looking on the opposite side of your piece to see where you're cutting and how far you're going in on the cut. Is it all right if I slide the headstock just a few inches here? Is that going to be? I'll keep it in view, but this is actually getting in my way. There we go. Now the other reason why you don't want to get too aggressive with the shape of this right here is because you have to think about, if you're going to do this with only a gouge, how far can your bevel go before you run into wood, right? So if I'm in here, how far can I go in before my tool actually hits the piece on the opposite side? So this is about 45 degrees. I think it's about 45 degrees for my bevel right here. My spindle gouges, I've got a couple that are probably at about 35, 40. So I use my heavier gauge one sometimes to get around some of these narrow spots. But we're going to try to do it with just this right now. Before I can really get too much further, I need to remove some more material in the middle. So you always want to make sure you adjust your tool rest to where it's going to be best for the direction you're going. Because with a smaller diameter tool, you're going to be hanging off the tool rest a lot with this. You want to make sure you're as supported as you can be without having to resort to a larger tool. I don't have an air compressor with me. I have one at home. But if you don't, you just need a little piece of pipe to be able to lower, clean out the inside of your piece. Just don't breathe back in when the tube is in there, because you'll need to take a break, clean that out. All right, so my hand's way over here. And I swing it all the way over to here. See how far that's got to go to get in there? And there's bevel contact the whole time. Is my arm in the way? And this is where this starts to get real tricky, is because you're going kind of, instead of going towards the headstock, you're actually going away from the headstock or at an angle to it. And so you need to make sure the speed of your cut is slower than you might do if you were just hogging out material. And the reason being is that if your force is going to be this way as opposed to this way, you're going to get more chatter from the wood and your tool because it's unsupported. It doesn't have this spindle in front of it or behind it to support it right there. We've still got some wood we can remove. Now, do you hear, anybody hear that little like vibration that's going on right there? So the bevel of my tool is contacting the wood just fine, but I'm actually not getting the tip of my tool in where I want it because I'm just too far. I actually can't extend far enough right here. So we've got a gouge with a slightly, there we go. I think this is around 35 degrees for the bevel right here. And this is a really thick tool, so it's got a really funny grind to it right there. But really, it's a detail spindle gouge. So it's a nice thick half-inch tool. And I'm just going to use it so I can try to get a little bit more of this wall material out without having to move the lathe. Okay, that's better. All right, we're going to go with that. That'll be good. And you don't need this tool to do this. Just make your piece a little bit more open at the rim. There we go. So you can get your whatever gouge you're going to use in there without running into problems right there. That's it. With this one, to get all the way over inside here, that's where you need a tool like that, or you need something steeper angle-wise to get inside there. Okay, so now that we've got this wall down to about right here, completed, kind of the beginning of where this curve starts, Now we got to get all the way around the rest of that right there. And for the majority of that, we're going to use the bottom tool to get around there. Because we can get across the bottom, we know that. We can also get across the wall with this tool too. So let's remove a little bit more material on the bottom first. And I said earlier that you want to make sure you've got bevel contact when you're doing this, so I need to figure out kind of where my bevel is. And I might need to adjust the height of my tool rest, or I might even need to adjust the bevel on my tool to a different angle. Right now this one I think is around 75 to 80 degrees, and that's great for going across the bottom, but I might need something more like 60, 65 to get around this corner. Because of the micro bevel on it, I can usually adjust that pretty easily by taking off a little bit more steel. Or if you have another gouge line around, you can have two of them. One at 80 degrees, one at 65 degrees, or whatever you want to have handy.
What would happen if you took the bottom down first all the way?
If I took the bottom down first all the way,
Yeah.
you might get a little bit more chatter, a little more shake to it, because you're removing material or mass in the middle of the piece, and then you're going to be working on the outsides of the piece. So you could, if you wanted to put like a pilot hole down in there just so you know where the bottom is, you can do that. But if I were to take the entire middle out and then start to work the walls will get real wobbly, especially because it's wet. And this is the point where, because now that I'm to the thickness I want to be on this wall right here, as I go forward, you might even see this start to wobble a little bit. It's actually just stretching out or starting to dry out and start to change shape. That's the other thing that you're going to need to be careful of if you're working with green material and if you're getting thin. So find the bevel, and to do that, I usually start here in the middle. This is actually a great camera for this. I start here towards the middle, not here on the outside, because this lets me find where the bevel is and just kind of bring it slowly to the middle. And as long as I'm utilizing the bevel on this tool, this little thin bevel that we have right here, I'm not going to get a lot of chatter or a lot of bumps or vibration inside the piece right here, because it's going to be gliding along where we want it to. It's when I don't have contact there that suddenly I'm going to get chatter. You're going to hear it. I'll probably end up doing it here. You're going to get chatter, and it's not going to have that smooth surface on the bottom. So here I've got bevel contact. I'm looking for the cut. There it is. And I can bring it to the middle. Now somebody always says, well, you're using the front of the flute there to do that. And I am actually right there, because that is more of an aggressive cut right there to clear that wood out. Once it's out of there, then it's going to move more to the back of the flute to have that smaller cut, to have that smoother surface at the bottom there. So we're getting a nice smooth surface at the bottom, but we still have a lot of material to remove, and we still haven't dealt with these walls yet. But now we've got some material out of the way where we can deal with the wall and with that curve right there. Because they're enclosed, you got to stop pretty regularly to remove the chips. They don't eject nicely like you do on an open bowl. And if you leave those chips in there and you just keep trying to take out material, what happens is those chips get stuck under your flute, and suddenly you've got other problems going on inside there. So make sure you take those out on a regular basis. So I got my contact here. I got shavings in the way that I got there. Yep. You can't quite see it, but there's actually a little ridge right here. Let me... should just cut the front off and then you can see easier. There's a little ridge right here, and that's where my other tool stopped and where this tool has to meet up and get around the edge there. And the difficulty that I've seen a lot of people have trouble with a gouge like this, with the bottom bowl gouge, is that they just don't get enough swing with it. They're not getting it all the way around so that the bevel contact stays in the same spot. Usually, they'll get it part of the way around and then they'll stop and they'll try to push the gouge across. And when you push the gouge across, you're losing that bevel contact and you're not going to get that nice bottom right there. Now, let's check our wall thickness here. All right, so where we are right here, I kind of like where that's at, so we're just going to try to meet that up. We got a lot of material to remove down here at the bottom still. And this is just not quite getting into that corner where I want it to. So this is where I'd want to adjust the bevel angle to get in a little bit deeper. So I think this guy, yeah. This guy has a think about a 60-ish degree angle on it. So that should help me get around this corner a little bit better right here. I actually need something even a little bit smaller than that. So this is a 3/8 inch tool. It's all the same grind, it's all the same style of tool, but it's a different angle on it and it's a little bit of a smaller tool to get around this corner right here. With the smaller tool, there's going to be more chatter, so I got to listen for that and make sure I'm not getting too much. Instead of regrinding the tool, I'm just pulling out a different tool. There we go. This will get there. That's what we want. So this is also just a swept back grind. I think it's got about a 55 degree angle on the front. There we go. So similar to this gouge I've been using here, but it's a little smaller and has a little bit of a higher bevel angle. Did you hear the vibration though with the smaller tool? Even on a small piece like this, you're going to get that. But we got rid of that gap that we wanted to right there. And so now we've got a much smoother transition. Take just a little light pass there. There we go. All right. We're going to go back to this tool, across the bottom, see if we can get it all cleaned up. And if you're new to this style of tool, I definitely recommend you try it on like an open bowl or on or the front like I was doing here earlier, so you can get the feel of it. Once you get the hang of it, it doesn't feel too weird. But for some people, it just feels a little odd the first time you try to use it. Check our wall thickness here again. Yeah, so the thickest part of our piece is still this middle section right here. We got a thinner rim here, and it's getting a little thinner towards the bottom. We don't want to go too thin, but we want to have a nice light bottom there. If you leave the bottom too thick, the bottom's just going to split. It's going to crack, just like it would on any other bowl you might be drying out. If you're going to twice turn a bowl and you leave the bottom too thick, too heavy, it's just going to split on you when it's drying there. Slow down at the middle. So you go through that middle section without just tearing out the middle or making a little divot. There's a little divot right there. So we'll do that one more time. Okay, that's good enough for what I'm going to do here tonight, I think. And you can feel inside here afterwards, you can kind of feel where some of those transitions are right there. And usually I would try to get rid of those, but I'm going to leave them in there so you can kind of feel kind of where they are on the piece. So if you want to try to do this later on, you can kind of know where, okay, that's where that transition is going to be before we get into this curve here down at the bottom. We got a few more minutes. And take the bottom off.
Getting ready to.
What?
I was getting ready for that.
Yeah. So we're going to take it out of the chuck for that. Lots of ways you can take the bottom off. This is one of my vacuum chucks, but I don't need a vacuum for it. I'm just going to use tailstock support, and that'll let us take the bottom off. With a wet piece, you don't really want to put that on a vacuum chuck. It'll suck moisture into your vacuum. You could use a filter on it, but this is just as easy. I guess I should mention too. So I made sure I left my live center hole here so that I could put it back in and reverse it just like I'm going to do right here. If you got a bigger piece with a larger opening, you could still use some kind of a jamming system right here, or just, or even something like this, just to get it around right there. You just want to get pressure on the bottom of the piece inside, and pressure right here so that it's clamped in place nicely for you. You always want to try to make sure it's lined up. Like right now, it's not lined up.
Use a vacuum chuck on this?
You could use a vacuum chuck on it. Make sure you have a moisture filter, or like between your hose and the your vacuum. Otherwise, you could pull moisture into your vacuum. But on some of these pieces, I did do exactly that. And what I'm looking for here is I'm looking for making sure that this is aligned in my my chuck here, so that when I start taking the bottom off, I'm not going to make it too lopsided. But it's pretty much always slightly off. You just got to deal with that as best you can. And don't put too much pressure. You want to have pressure. You don't want to have too much pressure. You put too much pressure with this on a soft piece of wood, it'll crush the piece of wood. Don't want that. Unless you didn't like the piece, then you can crush it all you want. All right, I'm going to go back to the, here it is. This tool to start with. That's close enough for me, but I know it's going to warp and move, so I'm not worried about that. As long as I can get a nice curve on the bottom there, I think we're going to be all set. I'm probably only going to run the lathe at about 1,000 RPM. It shouldn't come off the lathe. I've got it compressed between two pieces right here. But above 1,000 RPM, you got the possibility, if it does fly off, that it's going to go a little bit further than if it's below that RPM too. But you want to get it going fast enough that you can get a clean cut. Also make sure there's no vibration there happening too. So I'm going to cut into the headstock right here. Because I've got it essentially between centers, I want to cut into the headstock as best as I can. I don't want to cut across. I want to check my shape. I want to make sure that I haven't thrown it off too much. If I had more time, I'd sand it out real quick and make it nice and smooth for it to dry, but I want to get this off before you guys fall asleep out there. A nice small spindle dent gouge can come in handy too to get the bottom off right here without to get into some of these smaller spaces. I know I said I was going to only use gouges, but I'm going to use a saw too just to get it off. I think so, yeah. But just don't saw your finger off. Your wife won't like that. And then with the bottom here, the little nib on the bottom, You can sand it off. You can use a little knife to kind of pare it off right here, whatever you want to do. And then you're all set. All right, you guys don't want to watch me whittle this off, so there we go.
We didn't see that.
All right.
What brand is your tool handle system there?
That's usually the first question I get. Is this is a robust tool handle, so it's a collet handle. It's got a cup and then collets that you use on the inside here. And these collets you can change out for depending on the size of the tool you want to use it with. So I got these two set up for 1/2-inch tools, that one for a 3/8, and then I've got one for a 5/8 at home too. Makes it real easy. I only had to carry, I could have just carried 2 handles with me today instead of having to lug a whole bunch of tools around. But robust. They make the American Beauty, Sweet 16. I don't get paid by them.
You don't have to buy extra handles either.
What's that?
You don't have to buy extra handles.
Don't have to buy extra handles. Yeah, yeah. It's certainly not the cheapest thing on the market out there. But then again, I only have to buy them once, and I can keep using them. And when you got just a whole bunch of tools without handles on them, makes it really easy just to pop a different one in.
Are those Thompsons?
One of them is a Thompson, and I'll tell you what, the reason why I got the Thompson is because of the shape of the flute. This is a U-shaped gouge, so it has a nice continuous kind of U shape across the bottom, and I like this for the bottom tool because when I turn it, I get a nice shearing cut, and also as I'm going around the bottom there, if the cut actually moves on the tool at all, I get a very consistent cut. Whereas if I use this is a Sorby tool right here. The Sorby tool has a nice generous flute at the bottom right there, but it's just not as generous as the U-shaped flute. And you're welcome to come up and take a look at these together there. But that narrower flute shape on the Sorby means that it's a much smaller sweet spot for where I want the cut to be. For on the Sorby, I really want the cut to only be in a very small section of this tool, whereas with this tool, I could have the cut on a much wider area, and it's going to be a consistent cut around. Whereas if I move to a different part of this flute here, suddenly I'm making a very different cut. The other tool that I really like is a D-Way, because the D-Way has a pretty good U-shaped bottom. It's wider than the Sorby, but not quite as wide as the Thompson tool. So this is a great kind of medium ground for having a nice kind of U-shaped bottom, but then a nice wing shape on it too. And then really my favorite tool for doing the bottoms is this small one right here. This is actually a D-Way spindle gouge, but the 3/8 spindle gouge that they have has a nice thick cross section to it, so it's a lot more rigid than a lot of the other 3/8 spindle gouges out there, and it's just got a nice kind of U shape to it too.
You basically ride the bevel on it.
That's right, you want to ride the bevel all the way around. That's what we're doing right here, is riding the bevel all the way around. To do that, we have to switch a couple tools to really make it happen there because of the bevel angle. I could do it with just one tool, but I'd have to adjust the bevel angle as I go further in. So Emiliano, when he does his calabash bowls, he uses 3 tools. He uses a 40-40 bowl gouge. He uses a 55-degree bevel, kind of traditional ground gouge like this. And then he uses one that's, I think, 75 or 80. And he just changes to those so he can get around that big curve at the bottom and go all the way to the bottom with a nice smooth bevel rubbing cut. Yeah. Yeah, if you have any other questions, let me know. You're welcome to come up, take a look at this, and see what you think. And thanks for watching.